Hello and welcome to Paul on Politics live on KMTV. On this show we'll be considering the fortunes for Labour in Kent after the party's love-in at its conference in Brighton. Is the party really on course to win the next election? And is it connecting with the voters of Middle England who it needs to give them seats in Kent and Medway? And we'll be looking at whether the government is on a collision course with Kent councils over new house building targets. We'll also take a look at plans by Kent Police to tackle the scourge of the school run by finding parents dropping off their children in restricted zones. With us to discuss these issues are Mike Whiting, Conservative County Councillor for Swale, and Roger Truelove, a former Labour County Councillor and the Labour Group Leader on Swale District Council. Thanks to both of them for joining us. First, Josie Hannett reports on the apparent surge in support for Labour.
By the grin on this man's face, you wouldn't be able to tell his party lost a general election just months ago. Nevertheless, after unexpectedly surging up to 40% of the votes, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's brought his party back on the map. This week he told Labour's yearly conference that their party is now mainstream and has become a government in waiting.
Labour can and Labour will deliver a Britain for the many, not the few.
But is the cult around the Prime Minister in waiting too much hype? And what's next for the Labour Party? We asked South East MEP John Howarth for his thoughts.
Well, I've never been somebody who's sung songs and praised of particular leaders other than when they've been satires. I think that some of the cult around Jeremy Corbyn is a bit strange. But at the end of the day, you know, a lot of people have said that modern politicians don't have personalities. Jeremy does, and if that engages people with the Labour Party, then that's all to the good. What Jeremy has to do is demonstrate that he has a programme that will address the needs of the majority of the population, because if you don't address the needs of the majority of the population, you don't win an electoral majority.
Well, Roger Truelove, Labour conference seemed a bit like a revivalist meeting. Is it really credible that they can say, your party can say, we're going to form the next government just like that?
I think, Paul, there is a time when the mood of the electorate really changes. The key moments, 1979 was one, it changed and it brought Thatcherism. I think we're moving into a period of time when the public wants, Jeremy talked about collective aspiration. People have had enough of Thatcherism, they've had enough of austerity, that they want to see decent public services. They can't see that all the privation they've suffered over the last 10 years is doing any good to them or to the country. So, and I think the thing is, Jeremy Corbyn has tapped into that, and he's right in a way to say the centre of gravity.
But I mean, his remarkable turnaround in his fortunes was only a year or so ago that he was facing demands from his MPs to step aside. I mean, isn't this cult kind of everyone chanting, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," a bit much?
No, I don't think so. I think I think we are in touch with what people are thinking. I think when somebody gets a position like the leadership of the Labour Party or the leadership of the Conservative Party, some people grow into it and some people don't grow into it. And Jeremy Corbyn's grown into the position of leader. He seems to be a much more pragmatic leader than he might have been a year ago. And he's got the support of the parliamentary party now. He's got the support of the membership. The unity that was evident at Brighton is obvious, and the support for the leader was obvious.
Let's bring in Mike here, because unity is always the word that gets mentioned when parties' fortunes are being discussed, and the Conservatives don't seem very united at the moment, do they?
Well, I think you'll see next week that the Conservatives are far more united than perhaps
commentators
may be saying.
They'll put on a public display, won't they?
But there is unity. I believe there is unity at the top, and the unity of purpose to do the one thing that actually the Labour Party at its conference never even discussed, which was Brexit, of course.
Well, they did have a little discussion around
but the vote on it was never one of those 8 major things that they were going to discuss up there, and it never was going to be, because they cannot agree on it. And I think there is unanimity within the Conservative Party about how we can move that forward. So I think, as things move forward, you will see that.
But, I mean,
you will see that unity.
It's very odd, isn't it, that Labour was, in a mood which suggested they were they'd won the election, and your guys are kind of behaving as if they've lost an election.
There was clear disappointment that after the election that we found ourselves in the position that we did. Labour didn't win the election, but they clearly had a very good result. And I think Jeremy Corbyn is playing on that now, and I don't blame him for that, and he is putting his party together. He's sacking the people that don't agree with him. He's done that constantly, and he's bringing the people in that do. So he's creating that unity. But at the end of the day, the policies that they announced last week were very few new policies. They were very expensive policies as well. And I think that's where they're going to come unstuck in the future.
Let's bring Roger back in here because, there was a certain lack of direct policy which hadn't been announced before. We all know about privatisation,
but
zero-hour contracts.
Helping people who are in debt, putting social housing first. And the number of policies that were new, the PFI policy that was announced by the...
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the PFI thing. I mean, if you go knock on people's doorsteps, surely they're not just saying, oh yeah, I'm really worried about PFI contracts.
No, but they are worried about the fact that we are suffering austerity because in many cases we're having to pay large sums of money for PFI. And there's abuses. There's abuses in the PFI system. There are people paying themselves massive executive salaries, and there are people being paid to do menial jobs and get some of the money that should be going to the health service going to such people. People just feel that they want to see public services being accountable to the public sector and less of this private-public partnership that seems to end up with quite a lot of abuse of public money.
OK, now we're going to have to move on because time's against us, but thanks very much for that for the time being. Now, one issue that is dividing the parties is school funding. Earlier this week, the news broke that more than 1,000 head teachers had united to take the government to task over lack of money. KMTV's Louisa Britton spoke to Angela Harrison about it.
But the government is saying that they're trying their best to kind of bridge these gaps. They're saying this formula is a positive thing, aren't they?
They are, that's right, and there's been such a long history to this. The funding formula has been talked about for so long in government circles, and it was always heralded as this formula which would make things fairer. And so I'm sure the government will be quite disappointed that some heads are feeling it like this. Others will feel an improvement from it, I'm sure. And the government says that after the election, basically, they promised to put in an extra £1 billion into schools. So that should be coming through, the government says. But these head teachers are saying, not quite enough for us. So that's why they're mounting this very unusual campaign.
And do we know what the government said in response to this letter at all yet?
I haven't seen a definite reaction from them in talking about whether the head teachers are right or wrong to do it, but they have reiterated their point of view, which is they think that per pupil funding across the country has gone up, so they're not accepting the claims. But as you know, always with schools, these arguments are quite difficult to unpick. Teaching unions, head teachers unions are looking for more money, and many are talking about having to make very difficult decisions within their schools.
Now, Mike Whiting, head teachers are not unintelligent people. When they say they're suffering cuts to their budgets, they're right, aren't they? And your government's got to fix it.
The government has put an awful lot more money into school budgets. One of the things about the school funding formula that we are saying goodbye to was that it was universally seen as unfair. There were schools in some parts of the country with the same cohorts of children who were getting far more money than others, and other schools were losing out in the same way. This new formula tries to tackle that. It tries to allow the funding to follow the pupil in such a way that schools can be fairly funded, which is why I believe it is a fair funding formula.
And the government. Why are these head teachers wrong then? Are they just plainly wrong?
I don't believe the head teachers are wrong. What I'm saying is that the government had put more money into this. They've not just divvied the cake up more fairly now with the new formula. They've added funds into the cake to make it a bigger cake. Now, there are more and more children coming through, and more money will need to be put into the system. But most of the schools in Kent as a whole, will see an increase in funding, and most of the schools in Kent will see an increase in funding.
Right, Roger, let's bring you in on this.
Yeah, I mean, people defending the government always like to quote a global figure. But that takes no account of the increased pressures on schools, demographic pressures, pressures on the curriculum, children staying on after 16. There's a lot of pressure that is not being met by any extra funding. So we constantly hear the government's putting so much more money in. But as you rightly say, why are the head teachers complaining? They weren't complaining 10 years ago. they were saying, what do we do with all this money that we get from the Labour government?
I mean,
and now they're struggling.
Kent teachers are among head teachers who do think the formula is producing some odd results.
I'm not saying being a head teacher and being a bursar of a big school is an easy job. There are limited funding, but there's limited funding across the whole of the public services. We're aware of that. We're aware that the government does have to pay off this massive national debt that we inherited from the Rogers Labour Party. So we still need to keep paying that debt off, and we just need to do these things sort of slowly but surely. And we are putting more money into education, and we are sharing that money out more fairly, so that some of those schools that were unfairly disadvantaged in the past, and head teachers were calling for the same thing. And I think most of the head teachers appreciate the new funding formula. What they want to see, of course, is more money in the pot overall.
Head teachers appreciate the new funding formula.
Well, they clearly don't.
I don't know whether that's based on a survey or an anecdotal evidence.
No, they clearly don't. And the problem with Mike's argument is that, yes, we need to cut the deficit. The way we're going to do that is to get the economy to grow. And we're not going to get the economy to grow by cutting education funding. It's absolutely essential that they invest in education. If this country is going to get back on its feet, and it isn't, the idea that we've had a strong economy over the last few years is a fairy story. We need to invest in education, and it is counterproductive to be cutting effectively, in real terms, what schools have got.
So, Mike, KCC won't be making any representations to the government because they think it's all fine.
Well, I imagine KCC, yes. I didn't say that.
Right. When we come back, we'll discuss whether more houses in Kent will solve the chronic lack of affordable homes. Don't go away. Welcome back to Paul on Politics Live on KMTV with guests Mike Whiting and Roger Truelove. Now, it's been the Labour conference, but it's also been the UKIP conference this week, and they've just elected their new leader. Henry Bolton, a former Kent crime candidate in the commissioner elections, has won unexpectedly when his odds were quite long at the start of the contest. What do you make of Henry Bolton?
I know nothing about Henry Bolton.
Right, OK, well, that's sure. Do you know anything about him?
Well, he's got his work cut out, surely, hasn't he? I mean, the UKIP saw they were wiped out in the county council elections. Recently, their national share of the vote plummeted, I think, from 12% to 2% in the general election. I think he's got his work cut out, and we wish him well. Well,
he was on the sofa a couple of weeks ago. Let's hear what he had to say about the prospects for UKIP under his leadership.
And there is a clear need for a pro-Brexit opposition, and the only party that is going to unanimously, from its own perspective, provide a credible and constructive pro-Brexit sort of part to this debate is ours. Now, the point being that we have got to reorganise, we've got to make ourselves a professional party capable of engaging constructively in that debate.
I've changed.
Now, if you want to buy a home in Kent, you need deep pockets. Louisa Britton goes on location to examine if the government's plans for more homes in Kent will bring the dream of owning a home closer to those who can't afford one now.
Kent could be forced to accept thousands more homes every year under government plans to address what it says is the chronic shortage of affordable homes. The move to impose higher building targets is expected to put councils on a collision course with the government and is likely to cause friction with MPs. Under the government's plans, more than 10,000 new homes would have to be built across the county's 12 districts and boroughs. The government's plans will force councils to give the green light to building programmes if average house prices are greater than 4 times income.
There's a widespread acceptance that this is something which we as a society have to grasp with and have to deal with. We have an ageing society, but we have many people who are at the very start of their life cycle, kind of housing life cycle, if you like, who are not able to access good quality affordable housing.
The new targets have already been condemned by environmental groups who have said they'll put even more pressure on Kent's countryside. The worst affected area could be Swale, with the government saying the yearly target would be more than 1,000 new homes compared to the 776 the councils say are needed. Medway would also have to accept a figure of more than 1,000 new builds under the formula. The figures were released by the government under its Housing White Paper, designed partly to increase the supply of more affordable new homes, as Housing Minister Sajid Javid said the current way of calculating the number of new homes needed was outdated. This is Louisa Britton for KMTV.
Now, Mike Whiting, this is an issue your government's got right, hasn't it? The only answer to the house building shortage is to build more homes.
It's been the policy of many governments for many years to build more homes to help solve the housing crisis. My personal belief is that Kent over the decades has taken an awful lot of new homes.
Too many?
You can say too many. It's got what it's got, hasn't it? But we've taken an awful lot. And we've had to have extra infrastructure and everything else to go with it. This really does ramp up the pressure on local authorities. Authorities like mine and Rogers in Swale, who have used most of the brownfield sites are already allocated in their current plan. And their current plan has only just been adopted back in July, where delivering an extra 300 odd houses a year.
There is a real
without
issue.
taking that greenfield.
Everyone would
difficult.
accept there's a balance to be struck between the environment, but the fact of the matter is that house prices are way beyond the reach of anyone taking the first step on the ladder to home ownership, who wants to.
Indeed they are, but I think counties like Kent, as I say, are taking a massive share of some of that. There are other areas within an equal striking distance of London, an hour and 10 from London, who could take more houses and perhaps aren't being asked to take as many as Kent has been asked to take.
Roger, you must accept, as your leader accepts, that more houses are needed.
This is really quite desperate because we really need social housing, affordable housing. We've got 155 families who are literally homeless in Swale. So we need all that. But this has just come out, it's another figure. How are we actually going to acquire these social houses? You know, is the government going to fund local authorities to do it? And this is on top of them already imposing excessive number of houses on Kent. So in Swale and many parts of Kent, there just isn't the infrastructure to deal with the 700 a year that they've already said we could have. So how are we going to find the land for 300 more? If only they had legislated to make sure that the existing local plan would have a quota of social housing, then we wouldn't need to add it. But what we're going to get is lots of high market housing in Kent, not housing for people who desperately need it, young people.
You respond to that because Roger's raised some important points there, hasn't he, in terms of...
It's absolutely vital that we have adequate housing for those that need it. Getting people onto the housing ladder, it's very difficult in the South East for young people to get on the housing ladder.
Why not rebalance the economy, more investment up north then?
Well, the government is investing up north, but the white paper very clearly sets out in the covering notes that actually the government is looking to do is build houses where people want them, and people want to live in the South East.
Top down imposition of targets when all the Conservatives talk about is localism and local autonomy.
I say you said it in your introduction, Paul. I think there will be lots of discussions going on. This is a consultation. It's been launched as a consultation, and I think that the local politicians will be having their say.
Right. Okay. And I'm sure it will all come out in the wash. Now it's the scourge of the school run. Parents who drop their children off in restricted areas, now they could face fines for doing so. But is that the right way to address the problem?
When my boys go, there's a lot of parents who will park on the zigzag lines, and they will park on areas that are clearly marked not to park, especially on the corners. And I don't think that's very safe.
I think they've got to take into account that sometimes when there is a lot of kids at school and there is a lot of people parking up, sometimes there's not very many spaces.
I think it's very fair because I think that if you start allowing people to park outside schools where it says no parking, then other people will abuse it. It won't just be the people using the schools, it'll be everybody else.
Obviously police resources are very stretched at the moment, and you could argue the fact that they should be spending more time on more serious crimes.
I believe they are fair because there is like congestion around there, then you've got more chance of the kids being hurt. When there's like too many cars in that, and some of the parents have just stop, then they don't look what they're doing, then you've got more chance of the kids getting hurt.
Yellow lines mean yellow lines, they shouldn't park there. Emergency vehicles can't get to where they get going, and you've got the pressure of the kids running into school, you can't always see what they're doing.
I don't think it might necessarily work, to be honest, because lots of people get fined for lots of different things. It doesn't always stop the problem.
Now, Roger, I'm sure like most councillors, you get people asking you to do something about congestion around school gates. Is this the right way forward? Punishment?
One of the problems is that because of the pressure on schools, we're expanding schools out into the 2 form entry have become 3 form entry. So you've got 50% more children and their parents trying to pick them up. But the behaviour of some parents outside schools is totally unacceptable. They break the law. They park on the footpath. They park on open spaces. They park on chevron lines. They don't need to do that, and their behaviour is often animalistic. I went to stand outside of school the other day, and it was mayhem. It was appalling, and it was gridlock because nobody would move. And added to that, we have a massive, great bus in the middle of it trying to pick up children. So something has to be done.
No.
I've done things like get posts put on the green open spaces to try and protect them, but they still drive onto the green.
Mike, I know you've had similar experiences.
Exactly. I think every councillor's postbag is filled with similar.
But I mean,
similar stories.
Surely there should be a bit of education involved in this, right?
I think you can only educate so far. I think the schools work really hard with their parents, and I applaud the head teachers for the work they do with their parents to try to change behaviours. But at the end of the day, if people won't change their behaviour, what do you do? It's not just a mayhem, it's actually dangerous. It's dangerous for the young children going to school in the morning. So unless you do something about it, you can't live with that danger. Something needs to be done. So I applaud what Matthew Scott's doing in trying to get these powers for his PCSOs so that they can start to issue tickets.
And it depends on Kent County Council and Medway Council agreeing to give them the powers too. But, I mean, it does strike me as a bit of a hammer to crack a nut.
All I get is, why can't you give these people tickets? That's what the people complain. You sit there and you watch a car parked on the yellow line and some poor child having to run out behind it, as you say, into perhaps the path of an oncoming vehicle. And parents will say, why can't you give that man a ticket, or that woman a ticket? Why can't you get that parent to move on? I mean, I think this is a way of moving in the right direction.
I just wonder, Roger, if the presence of uniformed officers in amongst parents, at the beginning and the end of the school day is going to ramp up tensions in schools.
No, I don't think so. Where we have sent enforcement officers to schools, we see behaviour changes straight away, but we haven't got enforcement officers to go to every school. That is the problem. This proposal is worth trying. It's a pretty big nut to crack.
Okay. Well, Mike, your party's meeting next week under something of a sort of mixed fortunes it has had in recent months. What does Theresa May need to do to get things back on track? Briefly.
I think she needs to lead from the front, and I think she's doing that. I think that everybody that gets up and speaks really does need to consider what they say very carefully. And
well, that sounds a bit like some North Korean kind of.
Speak with one voice. No, not at all. But it's very important that I'm sure it will come out though. It's very important that we seem and are acting united. We've got some big challenges ahead. Big challenges, as I said earlier, with Brexit. Big challenges and a whole range of things in public finances. And we've got to act in a concerted and a joined-up way to beat those challenges.
All the delegates are listening to your wise words.
I'm sure.
That's all from us here at Paul on Politics. Thanks to our guests for coming into the studio. We'll be back soon. Catch up with all the latest political news by logging on to kentonline.co.uk or listening to KMFM. Thanks for watching.